Commander Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the cold metal of the observation deck window. Below her, the planet Kepler 442b burned with the orange glow of plasma strikes and exploding settlements. The battle had been raging for 6 hours, and now the enemy was finally retreating. Status report, she called to her bridge crew without taking her eyes off the devastation. Below, Zephyrian forces are pulling back to the northern continent, reported Lieutenant Torres from the tactical station. Our ground forces have secured the mining facilities. Estimated enemy casualties are around 40,000. Chen nodded, her breath fogging the reinforced glass. Another victory for the Terran Alliance, another planet stripped of its resources. The war machine rolled on, as it had for the past 3 years. She should have felt satisfied. The Zephyrians had started this conflict when they attacked human colonies in the Outer Rim. This was justice. But something on the surface caught her attention. Small shapes moving between the smoking ruins of what had been a Zephyrian settlement. At first she thought they might be survivors trying to escape. She reached for the magnification controls on the observation panel. The image zoomed in and Chen's blood went cold. They were children. Zephyrian younglings, no bigger than human toddlers, wandering alone through the wreckage. Their pale blue skin was streaked with dirt and ash. Some were crying, their large black eyes reflecting the fires around them. Others sat motionless among the debris, too shocked to move. "Vexhai," Chen called to her Altarian tactical officer. "Are you seeing this?" The tall, gray-skinned alien moved to stand beside her. His forearms worked smoothly across his control interface as he adjusted the display. "Seeing what, Commander?" "The children. The Zephyrian younglings down there." Vexhai's large purple eyes examined the screen for a moment. "Yes, I see them." Standard battlefield aftermath. The adults retreated according to protocol. Chen stared at him. "Protocol? They just left their children behind?" "Of course." Vexhai tilted his elongated head, a gesture that indicated confusion in his species. "Resources are limited during retreat. Adults can reproduce again. Younglings cannot contribute to the war effort." "But they're children," Chen said, her voice rising. "They're going to die down there." "Yes, most likely." Vexhai returned to his station, apparently considering the conversation finished. "Should I prepare the resource extraction teams for deployment?" Chen turned back to the window, her hands trembling. On the surface below, one of the Zephyrian younglings had found another child, smaller than itself. The older one was trying to drag the smaller one toward what looked like a partially collapsed building. "Shelter." "Commander," came another voice from behind her. Ensign Park, her communications officer, looked up from his console. "Ground forces are requesting permission to begin salvage operations in the settlement areas." "Belay that order," Chen said quickly. "Ma'am?" Chen's mind was racing. In all her years of military service, through dozens of battles and countless briefings on alien species, no one had ever mentioned this. How had humanity never learned that other species simply abandoned their young during conflicts? "Vexhai, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." The Altarian turned back to her, his forearms folding in a gesture of attention. "Of course, Commander. In all the wars your people have fought, in all the conflicts you know about between other species, do they all do this? Do they all leave their children behind?" "Every species follows this protocol, Commander. It is the logical approach to survival. Adults carry the genetic information and experience necessary to rebuild. Younglings are replaceable." Chen felt sick. She looked around the bridge at her mixed crew. There was Ensign Krex, a Taurian whose people looked like walking trees. Lieutenant Zara, whose Velican species resembled giant cats. All of them were watching her with expressions that ranged from confused to concerned. "What about when your homeworld was attacked by the hegemony 50 years ago?" Chen asked Vexhai. "What happened to the Altarian children?" "Those who could not evacuate with their family units were left behind as expected. The hegemony forces did not waste ammunition on non-combatants. They simply died when the cities were bombed. And this is normal?" "Commander," Lieutenant Zara spoke up, her cat-like features showing worry. "Are you feeling unwell? You seem distressed by standard military procedures." Chen turned back to the window. More Zephyrian younglings had appeared from hiding places in the ruins. Some were injured, dragging broken limbs. Others huddled together in small groups. She counted at least 30 visible in just this one section of the settlement. "How many settlements did we hit today?" she asked. 7, Torres replied. Complete tactical success across all targets, 7 settlements. If each one had 30 children left behind, that meant over 200 Zephyrian younglings were down there right now, abandoned by their own people, waiting to die from exposure, starvation, or the toxic atmosphere created by the plasma bombardments. Chen's hands moved to her command console before she fully realized what she was doing. Communications. Open a channel to Marine Battalion Alpha. Channel open, Commander. Major Williams, this is Commander Chen. I need immediate deployment of rescue teams to the surface. There was a pause before Williams responded. Rescue teams, ma'am. Our scans show no human personnel unaccounted for. Not for humans, Major. For the Zephyrian children in the settlements. The silence that followed was deafening. Chen could feel every eye on the bridge staring at her. When Williams finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Commander, can you repeat that order? You heard me correctly, Major. I want rescue teams deployed immediately to extract any surviving younglings from the bombed settlements. Ma'am, with respect, those are enemy non-combatants. Our orders are to secure resources and eliminate military threats. Chen closed her eyes, knowing what she was about to do would probably end her career. Major, I am giving you a direct order. Deploy rescue teams to extract those children. All of them. Commander, Vexhai said softly behind her. I must advise against this course of action. Command will not understand. No species in galactic history has ever... I don't care what other species have done, Chen snapped. We're humans, and humans don't leave children to die. She opened her eyes and looked back at the tactical display. The Zephyrian younglings were still moving through the ruins, still searching for safety that would never come, unless someone helped them. Major Williams, do you copy my order? Another long pause. Then, understood, Commander. Deploying rescue teams now. But ma'am, I have to ask, what do we do with them once we extract them? Chen hadn't thought that far ahead. What did you do with 200 enemy children whose own people had abandoned them? How do you care for beings from a species you'd been fighting for 3 years? Bring them up to the ship, she said.
We'll figure out the rest later. Yes, ma'am.
Williams out, Chen turned to face her bridge crew. They were all staring at her with expressions she'd never seen before. Not anger or insubordination, but something like awe mixed with complete bewilderment. Vexhai, I need you to prepare medical bay for non-human younglings. Contact Dr. Martinez and tell her we'll need information on Zephyrian physiology. Commander, the Altarian said slowly, what you are doing, it will change everything. Chen looked back at the surface one more time. The rescue shuttles were already launching, their lights cutting through the smoky atmosphere toward the settlements below. Maybe it's time for a change, she said. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez checked her environmental suit one last time before stepping off the shuttle ramp. The air on Kepler 442b was thick with smoke and chemical residue from the plasma bombardments. Her squad of 12 Marines followed behind her, their boots crunching on the broken glass and debris that covered what had once been a street. Rodriguez to Commander Chen. She spoke into her comm unit. We're on the ground in Settlement 7, beginning search patterns now. Copy that, Sergeant. Remember, we're looking for survivors, specifically younglings. Handle them carefully. Rodriguez had served under Chen for 2 years, but she'd never heard the commander's voice sound like this before. There was something desperate in it, something that made Rodriguez think this mission meant more than just following orders. You heard the commander, Rodriguez told her squad. We're looking for kids. Zephyrian kids, specifically. Anyone spots one, you call it in immediately. Corporal Davis raised his hand. Sergeant, what exactly do Zephyrian younglings look like? Rodriguez pulled up the briefing file on her wrist display. Pale blue skin, big black eyes about the size of human toddlers, but they can walk and communicate. They're scared, they're alone, and they're our responsibility now. The squad moved through the settlement in pairs, checking every building that hadn't been completely destroyed. The plasma strikes had been precise, targeting what intelligence had identified as military installations and resource depots. But in a civilian settlement, the line between military and civilian infrastructure was often blurred. Got something here? Called Private Chen from inside what looked like it had been a school. 3 younglings alive, but they won't come near me. Rodriguez hurried over to find Chen kneeling about 10 feet away from 3 small blue figures, huddled in the corner of a partially collapsed classroom. The younglings were making high-pitched sounds that might have been crying or calling for their parents. Step back, Chen, Rodriguez said softly. She approached the younglings slowly, removing her helmet so they could see her face. The moment her helmet came off, all 3 younglings went silent. They stared at her with those enormous black eyes, clearly confused by her appearance. Rodriguez had brown skin and dark hair, nothing like the pale blue Zephyrians they were used to. "It's okay," she said in the calmest voice she could manage. "We're here to help." She reached into her pack and pulled out an emergency ration bar, breaking off a small piece and offering it to the nearest youngling. The small being looked at the food, then back at Rodriguez's face, then slowly reached out to take it. "Rodriguez," came Chen's voice over the comm. "What's your status?" "We've got 3 in custody, Commander. But there's a problem. They're terrified of us. I don't think they understand what we're doing. Just get them to the extraction point, Sergeant. We'll sort out communication later." Rodriguez looked at the 3 younglings, who were now sharing the piece of ration bar and watching her with what she was beginning to think might be curiosity rather than fear. "Come on, little guys," she said, standing up slowly and gesturing toward the door. "Let's get you somewhere safe." To her surprise, the 3 younglings stood up and began following her. They moved carefully, staying close together, but they were following. Maybe they understood more than she thought. Outside, the rest of her squad was gathering at the extraction point with more rescued younglings. Rodriguez counted 18 so far, ranging from what looked like infants to older children who might have been the equivalent of human teenagers. "Sergeant," called Corporal Martinez from across the square, "you need to see this." Rodriguez jogged over to where Martinez was kneeling beside a pile of rubble. Underneath, partially hidden, was a Zephyrian adult. Female, Rodriguez thought, based on the briefing materials. She was clearly dead, but her arms were wrapped around 4 younglings who were very much alive. "She stayed," Martinez said quietly. "She didn't evacuate with the others. She stayed to protect them." Rodriguez felt something tight in her chest. "Get them out of there, Martinez, carefully." As they worked to extract the 4 younglings from under their dead protector, Rodriguez's comm unit crackled with reports from the other squads. Squad 2 reporting 23 younglings extracted from Settlement 4. Squad 3 here. "We've got 15 from Settlement 1, but some of them are injured." Squad 4 reporting, "Jesus, Sergeant, we've got over 30 here. Some of them tried to hide in the water treatment plant." Rodriguez did quick math in her head. They were looking at close to 200 rescued younglings across all 7 settlements. Her shuttle could hold maybe 20 at most. "Commander Chen," she called into her comm, "we're going to need more shuttles. Already dispatching them, Sergeant." "How are the younglings responding to contact?" Rodriguez looked around at the growing group of young Zephyrians gathered near her position. They were no longer crying or making distress sounds. Instead, they seemed to be communicating with each other in soft musical tones. Some of the older ones were helping the younger ones walk. A few were even approaching her Marines, apparently curious about their equipment. "They're adapting, Commander. Faster than I expected." "What do you mean?" Rodriguez watched as one of the Zephyrian teenagers pointed at Corporal Davis's weapon and made questioning sounds. Davis, following some instinct Rodriguez couldn't name, knelt down and showed the youngling how the safety mechanism worked, being careful to keep the weapon pointed away from everyone. "I mean, they're not afraid of us anymore, ma'am. It's like they figured out we're here to help and now they're just accepting it." "Interesting. Continue extraction operations. Additional shuttles will arrive in 15 minutes. Rodriguez moved through the group of rescued younglings, making mental notes. They seemed remarkably calm for beings who had just lost their families and communities. Some were clearly in shock, but others were already forming small groups, with older younglings taking care of younger ones. One of the youngest, barely larger than a human baby, had apparently decided that Private Johnson was its new protector. It clung to Johnson's leg armor and refused to let go, making soft purring sounds whenever he tried to move. "Sergeant," Johnson called out, "what do I do about this?" Rodriguez looked at the tiny blue figure wrapped around Johnson's leg and felt something she hadn't expected. A fierce protective instinct, the same feeling she'd had when her nephew was born. "Let it stay there, Johnson. Just be careful when you move." The additional shuttles arrived as promised and the extraction went smoothly. Rodriguez was amazed at how cooperative the younglings were. They seemed to understand that the humans were trying to help them, and they followed instructions even when those instructions had to be communicated through gestures and simple words. As the last shuttle lifted off from the surface, Rodriguez found herself sitting next to the same 3 younglings she'd first encountered in the school. They were no longer huddled in fear. Instead, they were looking out the shuttle windows with what she could only describe as curiosity, watching their destroyed world fall away below them. "Rodriguez," came Chen's voice over the shuttle comm. "Good work down there." "How many total?" 207, Commander. All alive, most uninjured." 207, Chen repeated. "My God." Rodriguez looked around the shuttle at the young faces surrounding her. Alien faces. Enemy faces, according to everything she'd been taught. But right now they just looked like children who needed help. "Commander," she said into her comm. "What happens to them now?" "I don't know, Sergeant. But we'll figure it out." As the shuttle docked with the command ship, Rodriguez realized that something fundamental had just changed. Not just for these younglings, but for all of them. They had just done something that no military force in galactic history had ever done. They had rescued the enemy's children. And somehow, Rodriguez thought as she watched the younglings file peacefully off the shuttle, that felt like the most important mission she'd ever completed. Dr. James Okafor stood in Medical Bay 7, watching through the observation window as Zephyrian younglings played with toys that had been hastily replicated from the ship's fabrication units. 3 weeks had passed since the rescue operation, and the children had adapted to life aboard the human command ship with remarkable speed. "They're incredible," said Dr. Martinez, the ship's chief medical officer, as she joined him at the window. "I've never seen trauma recovery like this. It's as if they were designed to bond with whatever adult species shows them care." Okafor nodded, making notes on his portable datapad. As the fleet's xenopsychologist, he had been tasked with studying the rescued younglings to determine the best course of action for their care. What he had discovered in his research was disturbing the foundations of everything humanity thought they knew about galactic civilization. "Dr. Okafor," came Commander Chen's voice from the door. "Do you have a moment?" He turned to see Chen approaching with a datapad of her own, her expression grim. Over the past 3 weeks, the commander had been under intense scrutiny from Galactic Command for her unauthorized rescue operation. Court-martial proceedings were scheduled to begin in 2 days. "Of course, Commander. What can I do for you?" "I need to understand something," Chen said, looking through the window at the younglings. "I've been reviewing our intelligence files on every species in the Alliance, and I can't find a single mention of this abandonment protocol. How did we miss something this fundamental?" Okafor set down his datapad and rubbed his temples. This was the question that had been keeping him awake at night. "Because no one thought to ask, Commander. In all our diplomatic contact, in all our trade negotiations and military briefings, the subject of child rearing during wartime simply never came up. But surely in our cultural exchange programs focused on adult behaviors, adult social structures, adult decision-making processes," Okafor interrupted. "We studied how different species organized their governments, their militaries, their economies. We never studied their parental instincts because we assumed they would be similar to ours." Chen stared through the window at a group of Zephyrian younglings who were playing some sort of game with blocks. One of the older ones was carefully helping a younger one stack the blocks higher, showing the same patience and care that human children displayed. "So we're really the only ones?" Okafor pulled up a file on his datapad and showed it to Chen. "I've spent the last 3 weeks analyzing the evolutionary psychology of every known species in the galaxy. The evidence is overwhelming. Every other sentient species evolved from either pack hunters or hive-minded organisms. In pack hunter societies, only genetic offspring receive protection. In hive minds, individuals are expendable for the good of the collective. And humans evolved as cooperative breeders. We're one of the few species on Earth that practices alloparenting, caring for offspring that aren't genetically related to us. It's why human step-parents can love adopted children as much as biological ones. It's why we have foster care systems and adoption agencies." Chen was quiet for a long moment, watching as one of the Zephyrian younglings approached the window and waved at them. She waved back automatically. "Dr. Okafor, I need you to develop a protocol." "A protocol? For this?" Chen gestured toward the medical bay. "If we're the only species that can't walk away from abandoned children, then we need to be prepared for it to happen again." "Because it will happen again, won't it?" Okafor nodded grimly. "Every battle, every conflict, every planetary bombardment, there will always be younglings left behind. Then we need a system, Equipment, procedures, training. Everything our people will need to extract and care for alien children in combat situations. Okafor stared at her. Commander, you're talking about fundamentally changing human military doctrine. The resources required, the training programs, the specialized equipment for dozens of different alien physiologies? I know what I'm talking about, Doctor. Can it be done? Okafor looked back through the window. In the 3 weeks since the rescue, his team had learned an enormous amount about caring for Zephyrian younglings. They required a slightly higher oxygen content in their atmosphere. Their nutritional needs were similar to humans, but they couldn't process certain proteins. They needed more sleep than human children, but were active for longer periods when awake. Most importantly, they bonded with human caretakers almost immediately. It was as if their psychology was designed to accept care from any adult who showed them kindness, regardless of species. It can be done, he said finally, but it will require support from the highest levels of command. Chen smiled for the first time in weeks. Leave that to me. I want you to work with Sergeant Rodriguez and her team. They have field experience with extraction procedures. Combine that with your research on alien physiology and psychology. What should we call it? Chen looked back through the window at the Zephyrian younglings. One of them, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4 years old in human terms, was drawing pictures with crayons. Her artwork showed blue figures and pink figures holding hands under a yellow sun. The Innocence Protocol, Chen said, because that's what they are. Innocent. Over the next month, while Chen faced her court-martial, Okafor worked around the clock with Rodriguez and her Marines to develop comprehensive procedures for youngling extraction and care. They designed specialized equipment that could provide appropriate atmosphere, nutrition, and medical care for 17 different known species. They created training programs that taught human soldiers to recognize distress signals from alien children and respond appropriately. They developed communication protocols using universal symbols and simple gestures that could convey safety and care across species barriers. Most challenging was the psychological component. Okafor had to train human personnel to overcome their own cultural assumptions about child rearing and adapt to alien psychology. Zephyrian younglings, for example, were comforted by close physical contact and group sleeping. Altarian spawn needed to be kept in cool, damp environments. Taurian saplings required exposure to specific light frequencies. Doctor, Rodriguez said during one of their training sessions, I have to ask, what happens after we rescue them? We can't keep alien children aboard military vessels indefinitely. Okafor had been wrestling with the same question. That's the next phase of the protocol. We'll need to establish care facilities, probably on neutral worlds, places where rescued younglings can be housed, educated, and eventually reunited with their species if possible. And if reunion isn't possible? Okafor didn't have an answer for that. What did you do with war orphans from enemy species? How do you raise alien children who might never see their homeworlds again? The answer came from an unexpected source. During Chen's court-martial, news of the rescued Zephyrian younglings had spread throughout the galactic communication networks. The response was unprecedented. First came the confusion. Allied species couldn't understand why humans had wasted resources on enemy non-combatants. Enemy species were baffled by the concept of their adversaries protecting their children. Then came the requests. 3 minor Zephyrian colonies, cut off from their main empire by human advances, sent official communications requesting safe passage for their civilian populations. They specifically asked for human escort ships, stating they trusted human forces to protect their younglings. A week later, 2 other species currently at war with each other both sent messages to human diplomatic channels, asking if humans would be willing to establish neutral zones for youngling protection in their conflict areas. By the time Chen's court-martial concluded with her complete exoneration and promotion, the Innocence Protocol had become the most requested service in human diplomatic history. Doctor, Chen said during their final meeting before the protocol's official implementation, do you realize what we've done? Okafor looked at his completed research files, hundreds of pages of procedures, equipment specifications, and training materials. We've created a systematic approach to protecting alien children in combat situations. No, Chen said, looking out the viewport at the stars beyond. We've changed the nature of warfare itself, because now every species in the galaxy knows that if they fight humans, Their children will be safer with us than with them. Okafor followed her gaze to the stars, thinking about all the worlds out there. All the conflicts raging between species who had never learned to protect each other's young. The question now, he said, is whether the galaxy is ready for that kind of change. Empress Zarathul of the Zephyrian Empire stood on the observation deck of her flagship, staring at the human vessel that hung motionless in space 3 kilometers away. For the first time in her 200-year reign, she was about to meet with an enemy commander, not to discuss terms of surrender, but to request something that had no precedent in galactic history. Empress, said General Vorth, her military advisor, the human ship is requesting permission to send a shuttle. They say Commander Chen wishes to speak with you personally. Zarathul's 4 hands moved nervously across the ritual scarring on her arms, a habit she had developed during times of stress. Grant them permission. And General, ensure our escort ships do not target their shuttle. We are not here to fight today. The irony was not lost on her. 6 months ago, she had ordered the bombardment of 3 human colonies, killing thousands of civilians. The humans had responded by conquering 7 Zephyrian worlds and pushing her forces back to their home system. By all rights, this should have been the end of the Zephyrian Empire. But then something unprecedented had happened. Human forces had rescued Zephyrian younglings, not just rescued them, cared for them, fed them, protected them, and then impossibly offered to return them. The shuttle bay doors opened to admit a small human craft. Zarathul watched through the viewport as a figure in a human military uniform stepped out, flanked by 2 guards. Commander Sarah Chen looked smaller than Zarathul had expected, but there was something in her bearing that spoke of absolute conviction. Empress, Chen said as she entered the conference chamber, offering a respectful bow that was neither submissive nor arrogant. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Commander Chen, Zarathul replied, studying the human's face. I must admit, when your diplomatic channels requested this meeting, I was confused. Are you here to demand our surrender? Chen's expression softened slightly. No, Empress. I'm here because of your grandspawn. Zarathul felt her secondary heart skip a beat. Her grandspawn, the offspring of her daughter who had died in the first battle of this war, had been living in one of the settlements that human forces had attacked. According to all reports, they should have died when the bombing started. They are well, Chen continued, healthy, safe, and asking when they can see their grandmother again. You have them? Zarathul's voice was barely a whisper. We have them. Along with 347 other Zephyrian younglings we've rescued from various battle sites over the past 6 months. They're currently being cared for at our new facility on the neutral world of Haven Prime. Zarathul stared at the human commander, trying to process what she was hearing. Why? I'm sorry? Why would you save them? They are the offspring of your enemies. In any rational military strategy, their deaths would weaken our resolve and reduce our future population. Why would you actively work against your own strategic interests? Chen was quiet for a long moment, as if considering how to explain something fundamental about human nature to an alien mind. Because they're children, Empress. And humans don't let children die if we can help it. Any children. Even if their parents are shooting at us. But that makes no strategic sense. Your own younglings should take priority over enemy spawn. They do take priority, Chen said, but that doesn't mean we abandon other species' children. We have the resources to save both. Zarathul felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, complete bewilderment. As a military commander and political leader, she could understand mercy toward defeated enemies, strategic prisoner exchanges, even humanitarian aid as a political tool. But this was something else entirely. Commander, I need to understand something. If the situation were reversed, if Zephyrian forces found human younglings on a battlefield, what would you expect us to do? Chen's answer came without hesitation. I would expect you to follow your own protocols and leave them behind, because that's what every other species does. And that doesn't anger you. It saddens me, Chen said. But I understand that different species evolve different survival strategies. You're not evil for following yours. You're just different. Zarathul stood and moved to the viewport, looking out at the human ship. Commander, what you have done, what your species has done, it changes everything. How so? For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire has fought wars across 7 star systems. We have conquered worlds, enslaved populations, eliminated entire civilizations. And in every conflict we followed the same protocol. Adults retreat, younglings are expendable. Zarathul turned back to face Chen. But now we have encountered a species that protects our younglings better than we do. How do I explain that to my people? How do I justify continuing a war against an enemy that refuses to let our children die? Chen leaned forward in her chair. Empress, what are you saying? I am saying that the Zephyrian Empire formally requests a ceasefire, not because we are defeated, but because we cannot fight a species that we respect more than ourselves. The words hung in the air between them. Zarathul had never thought she would speak such words, but the truth was undeniable. In 6 months of warfare, human forces had rescued over 300 Zephyrian younglings. In 3,000 years of Zephyrian history, her own people had never once attempted to rescue the children of their enemies. There's more, Zarathul continued. 3 other species have contacted us requesting information about your Innocence Protocol. The hegemony wants to know if humans would establish youngling protection zones in their conflict with the Altarians. The Tarian Collective has asked if human forces would mediate their border dispute with the Velikans specifically, because they trust you to protect civilian populations. Chen sat back in her chair, a look of amazement crossing her face. We never intended for any of this. We just couldn't leave children to die. And that intention, Commander, is exactly why the galaxy is changing. Every species is being forced to confront a simple question. If humans are willing to die to protect our younglings, what does that make us when we abandon them? Over the next 3 hours, Zarathul and Chen worked out the framework for a ceasefire agreement, unlike any in galactic history. The Zephyrian Empire would withdraw from all disputed territories, but human forces would establish permanent youngling protection facilities on Zephyrian border worlds. Any future conflicts would be conducted under strict protocols that prioritize civilian evacuation and child protection. But the most remarkable clause was Zarathul's personal request. She wanted to send Zephyrian observers to study human child-rearing practices, to learn how a species could evolve to protect the young of other species. Empress, Chen said as they finalized the agreement. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Your grandspawn. When you see them again, will you tell them about this meeting? Zarathul considered the question carefully. I will tell them that their grandmother learned something important from the humans. I will tell them that some species in the galaxy are better than others, not because they are stronger or smarter, but because they care about children who are not their own. As Chen's shuttle departed for the human ship, Zarathul remained on the observation deck, watching until it disappeared into the docking bay. Around her, the Zephyrian Empire was already beginning to change. Her generals were requesting briefings on human military doctrine. Her scientists were studying human psychology. Her philosophers were debating whether evil could be defined as the willingness to abandon one's own young. But most importantly, her people were asking a question that no Zephyrian had ever asked before. If humans could learn to protect alien children, could Zephyrians learn to protect human ones? 6 months later, the first integrated human Zephyrian rescue team would deploy to a conflict zone on the edge of hegemony space. They would save 47 Altarian spawn and 15 Taurian saplings, working together to implement protocols that neither species had imagined possible. The age of human warfare was ending. The age of human peacekeeping had begun. Admiral Sarah Chen walked through the corridors of Unity Station, humanity's first interspecies diplomatic facility, listening to the sounds that had become the new normal in galactic politics. Instead of the harsh tones of military briefings and territorial disputes, the halls echoed with the musical voices of Altarian younglings playing with Zephyrian children, the chittering conversations of Taurian saplings, and the gentle humming of human toddlers. 5 years had passed since the first implementation of the Innocence Protocol. What had begun as an emergency rescue operation had evolved into something no one could have predicted, the moral foundation of galactic civilization. Admiral, called Dr. Okafor as he approached from the medical wing, now gray-haired but with eyes that sparkled with the satisfaction of work well done. The delegates from the Outer Rim Confederation have arrived. They're ready for the final vote on the Universal Protection Mandate. Chen nodded, checking her chronometer. In 30 minutes, representatives from 47 species would vote on legislation that would make the Innocence Protocol not just standard practice but galactic law. Any species that intentionally abandoned younglings in conflict zones would face complete diplomatic isolation and economic sanctions. "How are the numbers looking?" Chen asked as they walked toward the main assembly hall. "Unanimous approval expected," Okafor replied with a smile. "Even the hegemony has agreed to support it, though they required some interesting modifications to account for their hive mind psychology." Chen paused at the entrance to the assembly hall, looking through the transparent aluminum windows at the gathered delegates. 5 years ago, many of these same beings had been shooting at each other across contested star systems. Now they were debating the finer points of multi-species child welfare legislation. "Dr. Okafor, do you ever think about how we got here? How a single rescue mission changed everything?" Okafor followed her gaze to the assembly floor, where Empress Zarathul was engaged in animated conversation with General Vexhai, who had resigned his military commission to become the Altarian ambassador for Youth Protection Services. "I think about it every day, Admiral, but I've come to realize that it wasn't really one rescue mission that changed everything. It was the realization that humans had been different all along, and the galaxy just hadn't noticed." They entered the assembly hall and took their places at the human delegation table. Around them, the representatives of 47 species prepared for a vote that would reshape interstellar law. But Chen's attention was drawn to the observation gallery above, where dozens of younglings from different species sat together, watching the proceedings with the intense curiosity that seemed universal among children. In the front row, she spotted a familiar face. Kethara, one of the first Zephyrian younglings rescued from Kepler 442b. Now 12 years old in human terms, she served as a youth ambassador between species, helping newly rescued children adapt to life in the integrated care facilities. "Admiral Chen," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Sergeant Rodriguez, now Colonel Rodriguez and Director of the Galactic Youth Protection Force. "I wanted to give you the latest numbers before the vote." "Go ahead." "Colonel, in the past 5 years, we've rescued and successfully integrated over 12,000 younglings from 36 species. Current evacuation protocols have been adopted by 14 species for their own military operations. The average duration of interspecies conflicts has decreased by 73% since implementation of youngling protection zones." Chen absorbed the numbers, still amazed by what they represented. "Casualties? Military casualties in conflicts involving human peacekeeping forces have decreased by 81%. Civilian casualties by 94%. And Admiral..." Rodriguez paused, her voice taking on the same tone of wonder Chen remembered from their first conversation about the rescued Zephyrian children. "We've had 0 youngling casualties in any conflict zone where the protocol has been implemented." "0? 0. Not one child has died in a battle zone protected by human forces." Before Chen could respond, the session bell chimed, calling the assembly to order. Ambassador Tvek of the Hegemony, serving as this session's moderator, moved to the central podium with the fluid grace of his crystalline species. "Honored delegates." Tvek's voice resonated through the hall's translation systems in 47 different languages simultaneously. "We convene today to vote on Resolution 847, the Universal Protection Mandate for Youngling Welfare in Conflict Situations." Chen listened as Tvek read the resolution's key provisions. Mandatory evacuation protocols for all younglings in conflict zones. Establishment of neutral protection facilities on every inhabited world. Required training in multi-species childcare for all military personnel. And most importantly, automatic intervention by human peacekeeping forces in any conflict where youngling abandonment was documented. "Before we proceed to the vote," Tvek continued, "Empress Zarathul of the Zephyrian Empire has requested to address the assembly." Zarathul rose gracefully and moved to the podium. In the 5 years since the ceasefire, she had become one of humanity's strongest advocates in galactic politics. "Honored colleagues," she began, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of leadership. 5 years ago, my empire was at war with humanity. We fought with the conviction that we were defending our way of life against an aggressive, expansionist species. She paused, looking up at the observation gallery where the rescued younglings sat watching. We were wrong. Humanity was not aggressive. They were protective, and they extended that protection to beings who had never done anything to earn it, who could offer nothing in return, who were, by all strategic logic, expendable. Zarathul turned to face the human delegation directly, My own grandspawn sit in this gallery today, alive because human soldiers risked their lives to save enemy children. They have grown up in human care facilities, learned human values of compassion and cooperation, and they are better beings for it. Her voice strengthened, taking on the commanding tone that had once ordered the bombardment of human colonies. But this vote is not about gratitude to humanity. It is about recognition of a fundamental truth. Any civilization that willingly abandons its own young is not worthy of the stars. She gestured to the mixed group of delegates around the hall. Look around you. Look at the species represented here. Every one of us evolved survival strategies that included abandoning younglings in times of crisis. Every one of us accepted this as natural, inevitable, logical. Until we met humans. Zarathul stepped back from the podium, her formal address complete. I call for immediate vote on Resolution 847. The galaxy has waited long enough to become civilized. The vote was indeed unanimous, as Okafor had predicted. 47 species representing every major civilization in known space formally adopted the principle that no child should die alone on a battlefield. After the session ended, Chen found herself on the station's observation deck looking out at the stars beyond. The galaxy looked the same as it had 5 years ago, but she knew that everything had changed. Wars still happened, but they were different now. Shorter, more focused, more careful, because everyone knew that humans were watching, and humans would not tolerate threats to children. "Admiral," came a small voice behind her. She turned to see Cathara, the young Zephyrian who had become something of a symbol for the new galactic order. "Hello, Cathara. How did you like the vote today?" The young Zephyrian's large black eyes sparkled with excitement. "It was wonderful. But Admiral, I have a question." "Of course. My grandmother told me that before humans came, Zephyrians used to leave younglings behind during wars, but I've been studying history and I can't understand why." "Didn't they love their children?" Chen knelt down to bring herself to Cathara's eye level. Considering how to explain evolutionary psychology to a child, they did love their children, Cathara, but they loved them differently than humans do. They thought the best way to protect their people was to save the adults who could make more children later. "But that's silly," Cathara said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "Children are the most important thing to protect because they're the future." Chen smiled, remembering her own words from 5 years ago when she had first ordered the rescue mission. "You're absolutely right. And now the whole galaxy agrees with you." As Cathara skipped away to rejoin her friends in the youth center, Chen remained on the observation deck, thinking about the future. The Universal Protection Mandate was just the beginning. Already, human psychologists were working with other species to understand why evolution had produced such different attitudes toward child rearing. Human educators were developing new teaching methods that worked across species barriers. Human engineers were designing better evacuation systems and care facilities. But most importantly, human children were growing up alongside alien younglings, learning from an early age that family could extend beyond species. That protection was a responsibility that transcended genetics, and that the most important quality any civilization could possess was the willingness to care for those who couldn't care for themselves. The galaxy was becoming more human, not through conquest or cultural imperialism, Unit